Hi everyone, my name is Seva Tsivgas, and I am a senior diplomacy major from here at Seton University, and the president of the Women of Diplomacy Leadership Program. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Carrie Filipetti from the State Department. So Carrie, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little about your career.
Sure, thanks, Seva. And I'm really glad to be doing this. I wish I could be doing it in person, but I know we're all taking necessary precautions because of the coronavirus. So I just appreciate the opportunity to do this virtually. So I am currently the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cuba and Venezuela at the U.S. Department of State, and also the Deputy Special Representative for Venezuela at the Department of State. And I've kind of had, I would describe it as a unique career path. I started my major in college at the University of Virginia was actually religious studies, and I had always been really fascinated by American politics. I always wanted to work in foreign or domestic policy, but I went to the University of Virginia, and for those of you who may be aware, the University of Virginia is really popular for policy majors and political majors, and I'm kind of a contrarian by nature, and so I didn't want to be sort of pursuing the most popular major at my university. So I decided, well, understanding how religion interplays with politics is a critical part of understanding U.S. foreign policy. So I decided to study to study religion, and I actually got a minor in astronomy, which was just because I was really passionate about it. It helped open my mind to different ways of thinking about problems that otherwise, as a religious studies major, I wouldn't really have the opportunity to pursue. So I loved my time at the University of Virginia. I was really active in political organizations, primarily those dealing with Middle East politics. When I graduated, though, I kind of looked at my course of study, religious studies and astronomy, and I thought, well, that's not really preparing me for anything. And so I think I kind of undervalued what I had learned, and I thought that I needed to stay within that space. My concentration in religious studies was in Jewish studies. And so I decided to pursue a fellowship in Jewish studies at an organization in New York City. And so that was really my first job out of college, was working at it's kind of a think tank. It was called the Tikva Fund. And, I pursued that route because I had kind of pigeonholed myself, and I said, well, I'm a religious studies major. I need to, keep studying Jewish studies. The organization was great, but I think I started to feel a little bit sick of studying. I was always a type A personality, always loved school, loved learning, one of these types that's involved in every activity that's possible. But by the time I graduated, I really felt like I wanted to be producing something and a productive member of society. And for me, that didn't mean continuing to study. It meant actually kind of getting my hands dirty at the outset. So I benefited from my relationship with my boss at the time, who had another contact of his who was thinking about starting a philanthropic organization to donate to a lot of organizations that I had been dealing with in my Jewish studies career. So I ended up switching to that. It was called the Paul Singer Foundation. Paul Singer is a hedge fund manager based in New York. He'd had a foundation for many, many, many years, but it was primarily giving funds based on existing relationships and things like that. And I was called in, despite no experience, to really develop a structure and an organization, a mission, all of that around this foundation, around this giving. I did that for about 5 years. I loved it. I had a fantastic mentor who continues to be my mentor today. Nearing the end of that 5 years, I had realized something that I didn't know about my personality, which is that even though I'm terrible with finances and could never be a business person, I'm somewhat of an entrepreneur, in that I really like starting things. I like brainstorming solutions to big problems. But when it comes to maintenance and just continuing once the sort of, once you've come up with all the ideas and now just doing the portfolio management, that wasn't something that I felt like really inspired me. And so I started to look for another opportunity. We can get into this piece of it, but I ended up actually trying to get into the Marine Corps, was accepted, and then had a medical problem, so couldn't pursue that route. And just thought to myself, well, I really want to be contributing something that a core principle for me has been, how do I do something that helps people around me, that helps my community, that helps my country? Because a lot of what I had been doing at the foundation was work that was really useful to people in Israel and the Palestinian territories, but it wasn't necessarily helping the United States. And I had always felt like patriotism was a critical part of my identity. So I met with a lot of people who were friends of friends who were in different career tracks. And ultimately, somebody said something that I thought was a really powerful suggestion, which was, well, if you want to be involved in policy, why don't you find a political leader who has the traits that you really admire, the character, the dignity and integrity that you're looking for, and just work for that person, because as a young person, that's the best thing that you can do. And that really resonated with me. So I started to look at the kind of global, or the at least domestic landscape of American politicians, and truthfully didn't find so many that I felt like had the character and integrity that I was looking for. But one that did was Nikki Haley, who was at the time the governor of South Carolina. It just so happened that my period of thinking along these terms was the same time that she was being rumored to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. So again, I worked through my boss at the time, who had worked on issues that were important to Ambassador Haley, and had an existing relationship with her. Ended up putting in my name to do her Middle East policy. Started working, was hired by her to do her Middle East policy. They added Latin America policy because they wanted me to focus on something a little bit broader than just the Middle East. We ended up really focusing on Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, these countries that have been decimated by dictatorship over the last years. And from that, when Ambassador Haley left and I was looking for a new position, I parlayed that into my current role to continue the work on Latin America, which had really been, despite not what I had really studied in college, really been the thing that inspired me when I was working for Ambassador Haley. So that's kind of the very, very quick, or as quick as I could do it at least, a trajectory of my career so far.
Yep, it's really fascinating. I think one thing that I think a lot of students and members of our org will be really comforted by is the fact that you weren't 100% sure where you were going. You were kind of just following your general passions and what you were interested in, and you didn't necessarily have this like long-term goal that you were marching towards. How did you cope with that during the beginning of your career?
You know, it's a great question because, as I said, I'm a type A personality. So it was actually a little bit surprising to me that this is how things ended up for me, because, you know, as a kid, I said, I want to be on the Supreme Court. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And even in college, I was like, I really wanted to be on the Supreme Court, or, you know, something like that. And, you know, I think a part of it was being in college and opening myself up to these different types of experiences with different clubs and so on, and realizing that my passions can't really be boiled down into one unique thing. And I think if you look at your life, not just as what do you want to do for your career, but what are the things that you really want as a part of your life? And some of them may be intangible, you know, like happiness or something like that. And some of them may be more tangible, like a certain amount of money, or, you know, so on. For me, the thing that had always inspired me was the idea of justice. And so when I was young, I interpreted my interest in justice as, well, I'm going to be on the Supreme Court, because that's kind of the most logical connection. But as I got older, I realized that justice has so many different ways of approaching it. You know, you can look at it from making sure that there's equal access to healthcare, for example. So one of the things that I do as a volunteer is I volunteer as an EMT in Montgomery County. And so, you know, I see how this kind of pervades my life and my thinking. And so once I realized, as long as I'm pursuing something that fits within this space of justice, then I'll be happy. And I can also pull things from different areas. So for example, working in the philanthropic sector really helped me get a better understanding of the sort of on the ground work that's done by specific organizations to address challenges at a local level. And now I'm dealing with, you know, high level Venezuela policy, which is much more about, you know, the broad 30,000 foot level of how do we get a democratic change in a country where the current regime is resisting it. And so that they all have given me these different insights into this problem and this challenge that has motivated me since I was a kid. So that's kind of been, I think, why it hasn't stressed me out the way it normally would a type A personality, that I don't know what I'm doing in 5 years. I don't know what I'm doing in 1 year, but I'm confident in my abilities. I've proven myself in every position that I've been in. And I think, doing that over time also makes you much more confident to pursue kind of what you're interested in, where you think you can make a unique contribution.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask. I know a lot of students, they kind of start with one major and realize that the reason that they went into that major isn't what they thought it was, and kind of want to transition. And sometimes that can lead to some imposter syndrome, where people feel like, oh, my major or my concentration was here, but now I want to work in this totally different sphere. And that's not really where most of my experience is. How did you overcome that and kind of push forward, especially sometimes in a male-dominated environment?
Yeah, this is such an important question. So first of all, you will always have imposter syndrome. I mean, I am confident in what I can do, but there are days where I wake up and I just think, I'm not qualified for any of this. I'm way too young for any of this. This isn't my background. I see people who are on my team who report to me who have much more in-depth knowledge and experience in the areas that I'm focused on. But what somebody once gave me really, really good advice, which was when I came into this position, I met with somebody who had previously been the National Security Council Senior Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I had a very honest conversation with him where I said, I'm really honored that I was selected for this role. It means a lot to me that that I was nominated and put forward for it. But I'm worried because I don't know as much about Venezuela or Cuba as some others who will be working for me. And so how do I establish, a strong reputation in this space without having had the years of experience doing this? And he said, remember what you were hired for. You weren't hired to be the greatest, most in-depth expert on Venezuelan history and internal politics. You were hired because you have great policy instincts. You understand kind of directionally where the administration is going to go. You know how to prioritize, and you know how to lead people to get the change that we're looking for. That's why you're there. And your team is there because they have the expertise that they can contribute. And so making sure that you always bear in mind what you're there to do helps you, one, feel more confident in your position, but two, also understand, appreciate, and respect everyone around you who is there not as competition, but really there to help make sure that we're all kind of working towards the same objective. So something that I'll just admit that has always been somewhat of a source of embarrassment for me is that I'm working on Cuba and Venezuela. I'm not fluent in Spanish. My background was dealing with Middle Eastern politics. I had a background of speaking Hebrew. I speak a little Italian, and so that helps with the Spanish. I've been learning Spanish, but typically in my job, which is the penultimate position for those two countries at the State Department, Spanish is a prerequisite. And so the fact that I didn't have that was a real source of embarrassment to me for a really long time. And again, it's just about, as long as you're honest and upfront about what your abilities are. Obviously, there's something that I'm doing that makes people think that I'm valuable enough so that even though there is this problem, which is that I don't speak the native language of the countries that I'm dealing with, I'm still able to serve in this function and serve in this role. And I was very upfront, never try to hide your shortcomings. When I interviewed for this job, I made it very clear. I said, I'm not fluent in Spanish. That might be a deal breaker, but it's still something that I'd be interested in pursuing. And it ended up not being. And so I think owning those shortcomings is really important as well, and helps you feel like you're not imposing or faking anything, because everyone's really clear on your abilities. Again, imposter syndrome is never, ever, ever going to go away. I've had conversations with mentors who are at the top of their career and they still feel like they're completely incapable. But it's just about kind of managing that and understanding that that is just an emotional reaction we're having, and that's not actually represented by our realities.
Yeah, I think that's great for students to really keep in mind what their strong suits are and being upfront with where they know that they're something that they might not be able to fulfill. That's awesome that you were able to so clearly talk to someone about like why they truly needed you in this position.
Yeah.
So now to talk a little bit about your role now, how has the State Department been affected by the coronavirus pandemic, especially at such a high position, at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed the day to day. So most of us are on telework. I think it's well over 90% of us are on telework status. Mostly what we can do from home. Every once in a while, we'll have to go into the office just to manage some of the more classified materials. And so that is something that we really can't do from home. So I'll be in the office maybe about once a week. I think the biggest things that it has changed, though, number one is those of us who are in a management position have much more of a focus on the management side than we typically have to, because this is a really stressful environment. And so I need to budget my time instead of being, majority doing policy and then a little bit dealing with the management piece. Now it's about a 50-50 split because I need to make sure that my team is comfortable with things, feels that they're, on the same page on everything, and of course just are emotionally okay, because it's a really scary time. Some of my team, are taking care of elderly parents. Some of my team have young children. So we have to understand and acknowledge the differences between people that may make it more or less simple for them to, to change their schedules around. I also think one thing that I'm trying to correct is people are now working at very strange hours, but they're also working at their normal hours. So what that ends up turning into is people working on average 12, 13, 14, 15-hour days. Now, of course, some of that time is split with, childcare and so on and so forth, but it's still not okay, I think, for people's emotional well-being to be doing emails at midnight or 9 p.m. or 4 a.m. or something like that. I think we've entered this space where people are actually more comfortable working because they don't know what to do with themselves if they're not working, and so they're anxious to be working. But we're going to have to pivot back to a more normal posture, and so I'm trying to get my team to only work during normal hours, because that's something that I think is really affecting us culturally as well. We shouldn't be demanding responses to things, on Easter Sunday, for example. So that's one thing that I think we're still trying to work out. But generally, it's been going well. I think things have been actually busier at work. My days are typically 30-minute back-to-back phone calls all day. My iPhone battery is completely, destroyed at this point. But I've been actually impressed and surprised at how well the State Department has managed the transition so far.
That's great. That's really great to hear. And I'm glad that you're able to support your team during this time emotionally and kind of mentally as well as
We're
in the
trying.
workforce.
Yeah, that's a big piece of that's a huge piece of what I love to do, is just making sure that everybody who's on our team feels like, they have somebody who's looking out for them, who's protecting them, who's invested in their career, because these are people who have dedicated their whole lives to serving the country. And I think, my great advantage here is that I come in as a political appointee, which means I kind of, I jump in for 4 years, usually, anytime between 2 and 4 years. And I want them to know that, they have somebody that is really looking out for them and their careers. So it's not 4 years that's kind of wasted for them. And, they just feel like there's somebody who doesn't understand what they're going through.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. That's really great. So to pivot back a little bit to your education, I think it's really interesting that you were a religious studies major, because Seton Hall is a Catholic university, and so we do kind of have that influence no matter what major you are. So what do you think was the most valuable from your education that you've kind of used throughout your career?
Oh gosh. Well, certainly. So there's two things. There's the education itself, and then there's kind of the I guess the structure of the university system. So from the education side itself, what studying religion helped me really understand, because I mentioned I went into this because I wanted to study how religion has influenced, for example, American politics or Middle Eastern politics, and I ended up studying, like First Temple period Judaism, or something that's completely unrelated to either of those questions. And it was because I so fell in love with the subject. But I think the thing that most stuck with me that I use today, and why I think religion is actually a really great background for foreign policy, is this idea of identity politics. The idea of, why do I decide to identify? I have, 1,000 different identities in one. I'm Jewish, I'm half Catholic, I'm a woman, I'm an American, my background is Italian and Latvian. I'm an EMT, I am a diplomat, all of these different things. And so at any given time, those identities will kind of restructure and reorient themselves and become more or less important. So if I'm, traveling abroad, my American identity becomes much more significant to me because it's at risk in the sense that I'm now in the sort of minority there. And so understanding that interplay and understanding why somebody identifies as, group X in certain circumstances, and how they identify as group Y in others, and how that changes over time and space. I think that was the most interesting thing that I studied, and something that has stuck with me as I try to sort of deal with negotiations and diplomacy, and understanding how the different cultures influence what is and is not something that, my counterpart will be receptive to. So I thought that was a really great part of my university education. The other is just the structure of the university. I had incredible mentors, and actually, I think I think one of the best things I did was, by being a contrarian and not studying politics at the University of Virginia, I was part of a much smaller major. And because I was part of a smaller major, I was able to get the one-on-one attention from my professors that I wouldn't otherwise have had in a major that has, hundreds or thousands of students. So I had great relationships with probably about 5 or so core professors, one of whom actually helped me get my first job, that fellowship job. Others of whom have really influenced my life and career trajectory in numerous different ways. And so I think getting those relationships is a critical part of at least what was helpful to me at the university level.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear. I think at the diplomacy school at Seton Hall, we kind of share the same thought process. There's only about 100 of us per year, and so it's really great in the same vein that we get that focus, and I definitely value
sure.
that. So you talked a little bit about your identity and how your identities kind of function throughout your life in different modes. Do you think as a woman you have been noticed any kind of struggles, disadvantages, or advantages that you've had working in the State Department or in foreign policy in general?
Oh, yes, definitely. So first of all, I will say, in any profession, being a woman, you're treated much differently than a man. I will say it does feel worse in a diplomatic setting. It does feel like there's more of a bias against women. I'll also add here that it's difficult for me to distinguish what is a bias against women and what is a bias against being young, because I also think as a young woman, you are particularly looked down on. You're not taken seriously. Now, I have a really good advantage, which is just something that's naturally, a part of my genetics, which is that I'm extremely, extremely tall. I'm 6'2", and I often wear heels. So I'm usually pushing 6'5" in a professional setting. It sounds silly, but that really does help me a lot, because that gives me the sort of immediate physical presence that I think makes it much more challenging for them to just sort of immediately dismiss me. That being said, I mean, being a young woman is a serious, it's treated very differently from being even, I think, a young man. If you look at the promotion rates at the State Department, for example, I think at the sort of lower and medium levels, it's about the same for men and women. But if you look at the highest levels, if you look at ambassadorships, particularly career ambassadorships, so there's the career ambassadors and then the political ambassadors. If you look at the career ambassadors, women are not given the same sort of high status countries that men are given. And this is a systemic problem. I don't know exactly what causes it. I haven't been in the State Department long enough to understand it. But it is something that I can just categorically point to as a, the representation of women in these higher level ambassadorships is much, much lower than it should be, particularly since, respectfully, I've dealt with a lot of people at the State Department, and the ones who stand out as the top performers are typically women, probably because we have to fight a little bit harder to get there. It The State Department is the only. I was once in a secure video conference, which had a bunch of different agencies that were a part of it. DOD, DOJ, state, etc. I think there must have been 150 people that were a part of the call. I was the only woman. Now, it's not typically that bad, but that is a memory that will stick with me probably forever, because it was just so reflective of this problem. And, we're dealing right now with trying to promote a peaceful solution, a peaceful negotiation in Venezuela. If you look at all of the research, as I'm sure you know really well, Seva, if you look at the research, women being involved in these kind of peace negotiations is actually a really strong indicator for future success for those negotiations. And it's because we come with a different perspective. We do have a different way of approaching problems, whether it's something that's biological or whether it's something that is sort of culturally trained, I don't know. But I do think having those separate voices is really important. And so, for me, the way of getting around it has just been, one, relying frankly on my height, which I know doesn't help so many women. And also trying not to downplay or upplay different parts of my personality and just letting myself be naturally who I am. I think there are some women who will try to make themselves appear more masculine. There are other women that will make themselves, try to play up the femininity and so on. For me, I'm kind of, a mix of, I kind of float between personality traits that would be defined as masculine in a traditional setting and defined as feminine in another setting. So for me, I kind of have both. I've always just kind of approached people in the way that felt most natural to me. I think that helps. But I think the biggest problem is when you need to discipline someone or when you need to criticize someone. If you're a woman, you will be seen as irrational and too aggressive, even if you handle it perfectly and beautifully and completely appropriately. I don't know how we get around that. I don't have a solution to that, but that's something that I have found is, if there's ever a moment of, you are a woman and you disagree, you could be the most diplomatic person in the world. People will say that you're being unreasonable. And so you just can't let that criticism get to you, because it's not. It's because you're a woman, and right now culturally we just don't accept that, you would be the lone holdout, or that you would criticize someone else.
That's definitely something that I've struggled with, like even in my undergrad. I totally understand that. And it's definitely challenging. And I agree with you. I have no idea how to get around that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried a bunch of different things. I've tried to be so kind of nuanced in my criticism that it's not even clear what I'm saying anymore, or that I'm even criticizing them. I do think there are small things we can do to try to, come across more assertively. So the first one is, women, or maybe it's just me, but I have a tendency to use exclamation points when I write emails, thank you with an exclamation point. I would never say, don't do that, it's not serious, but it does sometimes help to just, try to not be so effusive in your writing. Getting rid of little words like, oh, I'm just saying, or, don't raise your hand and say, I have a question, if everybody else is just coming out and saying it. I think those small tools are useful, but we got a long way to go. And so, the more women that get in these positions, and the more culturally we're all going to have to learn how to respond to it. And so I think that's the best thing we can do, is just not limit ourselves, and hopefully over the next few years, and fortunately decades, that will start changing.
Yeah, definitely. So to kind of bring it back to to a lot of girls who are probably really interested in ending up in a position that you're where you are now. I know this took a lot of work for you, but what advice would you have to undergrads who are maybe in their freshman, sophomore year, who have some time still in college, for them to make moves while they're in this student setting, to kind of push them in this direction of working for the State Department one day?
Yeah. So first of all, and this is something that I would advise anyone, whether they want to work for the State Department or not, which is the number one kind of career advice that I would give that has worked for me to date is pick your boss, not your job. Um, I have been offered jobs that seemed fantastic and were probably better quality jobs than I ended up taking, in terms of, they're more impressive, or they're, more money or something like that. But I have followed people who I want to learn something from, and people who I also really respect. So not just someone smart and talented, but somebody kind and respectful with integrity. I mean, if I look at my history of bosses, right now I'm working for two. I really have two bosses since I have two jobs. They are some of the most uh, sort of well-known diplomatic negotiators that the State Department has had. They're incredibly kind people. They give me the opportunity to voice concerns, differences at every juncture. As I said, when I started the Singer Foundation, I had this fantastic mentor who is still kind of like this second mom for me. She's just really, you guys actually should interview her, because she has done some fantastic stuff in her career, and just a super powerful woman. Um, but and then of course Ambassador Haley has been, everybody can speak to her integrity and her character. So I would always say pick your boss, not your job. Because you want to, that's how you're constantly learning, is if you have someone who respects you and trusts you and gives you kind of, bandwidth, to do what you're interested in. Somebody who has a lower level job but a boss who respects them has more power than somebody who's, in a position of ostensibly more power. But in terms of getting into the State Department directly, so first of all, I think, again, making sure that you're making connections with people who, either currently or in the past have been in the State Department, whether they're in think tanks now or whether they're professors. I mean, I'm sure there's a number of professors. And so just kind of talking to them and showing your genuine interest will be really useful. That's ultimately how I ended up getting my jobs, is just, my passion coming through, and my competence coming through, and people wanting to kind of take a chance on me. It also is don't ever underestimate your abilities. Um, I read some survey or something that said, part of that sort of looked at how men and women approach job applications differently. And it said something along the lines of, when women approach a job application, they'll look at the minimum requirements and the sort of, nice to have requirements. And if they don't have every single one of those, they won't apply. And when a man looks at it, he approaches it as, do I have one of these things? And if I do, then I'll apply. And I don't know how true that is, but I can definitely see elements of that. And I think that's something else, is do not sell yourself short. You would be shocked at the low levels of competence that are out there in the working world. I mean, you really would be shocked. And so, never underestimate yourself. I have this story that my dad told. My dad has been in the music industry for decades, and he's a music producer. And at one point, he had been asked to do this live show in Central Park. I think it was like a Pavarotti and Friends or something like that. And he had just become a music producer. He was super new to it. And they said, have you ever done a live show before? And he said, absolutely, I do them all the time. So they gave him the gig, and he did fantastic. And he's done, a bunch of shows since then. The truth was, he had never done a live show before, but he knew that he could. He knew how it worked, and he was 100% confident that he could do it. So it's not to say lie, but recognize, what can you do? What do you know that you can do? And make sure that you position yourself to be able to do those things and prove those things to other people if you already know that you can do it. And usually women have a lower sense of what they're capable of. So I have no sense that people are going to go out there, saying too much. I think really just being confident in what your abilities are is really useful. I know there are internship programs at the State Department. Again, I was kind of in an uncommon path. There are two different routes to the State Department. The first one is the Career Foreign Service or the Career Civil Service. And then the second is a political appointee. So I came in as an appointee, which is a totally different process and largely requires either being a sort of uniquely qualified expert who's been working on an issue for a number of years, or somebody who, has connections with people who are already in the administration. I mean, truthfully, those are probably the two best ways of getting in. For career, foreign, and civil service, which frankly I would have applied for had I known how to do it when I was younger. This is a normal application process, and it's what gets you into the ranks of the State Department, and that's what you kind of go through to get to whatever your goal is, whether it's being a director of an office or an ambassador or assistant secretary or something like that. So I would just say, again, don't pigeonhole yourself, because I always wanted to do foreign policy, but I never actively pursued getting into the State Department. So just be open to opportunities as they present themselves, and don't be too focused on kind of building this path for yourself. Life will take you in a million directions. I think the biggest thing that I learned when I graduated college was I never realized how much up until that point had been scheduled and planned for me. You will go, for me at least, I had the benefit of coming from a family where it was not a question whether or not I was going to go to a college. And so I had that opportunity and that privilege. And so until then, I was always, okay, I'm going to elementary school and then middle school and then high school and then college. I'm going to be studying these types of things. I made decisions for myself, but they were never major life decisions about, what my next steps are, because that was already predetermined for me. When you graduate from college, the entire world is open. And, we know that cognitively, but we don't really understand or appreciate what that means until we're in that setting. And so that can be a really challenging transition for a lot of people, especially type A personalities. And so again, just try to be comfortable with the fact that your life is going to be moving you around. Sorry, I got to notice that my battery's low. That life is going to be moving you around in a number of different directions, and to, allow yourself to kind of move with that flow a little bit.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've given us some really great advice and some really great things to think about. I know for myself personally, graduating in just a month, I know that that's definitely a place that my head's going to be at very soon.
Well, and especially now graduating, I mean, I can't even imagine graduating in the middle of all of this. It must be terrifying to be thinking about, next steps. And
people are definitely comparing it to graduating in 2008. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting. We'll see. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We had a really great conversation today. If there's anything else you'd like to share before we can close out?
Say, first of all, thank you. I really love talking about this kind of stuff. As I said, I've benefited so much from having these amazing mentors, usually female mentors, who have really kind of brought me along and given me insight into their journeys and helped me understand the differences between my journey and theirs, because of course, what has worked for me is not going to work for everybody. So I'm just happy to stay in touch with you, to stay in touch with any of the other women at Seton Hall who would be interested in, either grabbing a coffee after this ends, or even a phone call or conversation. I'm happy to do that at any point. So please continue to stay in touch, and I'll look forward to speaking with you guys again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I hope you stay safe and well.
Thank you. All right. You too, Seva.
Okay. Okay, I myself recording.